Heard every week on amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and one of the first podcasts on the internet. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1423 of This Week in Amateur Radio.
CHU, Canada's official time signal on shortwave, is scheduled for shutdown later this month. Meanwhile, an amateur radio group is petitioning the NRC in Canada to reconsider the signal's shutdown. We will have the story. The FCC targets an unlicensed radio operator with a notice of unlicensed operation and a proposed $21,000 fine. The ARRL launches a new online comparison tool you can use to help decide what new rig to buy. The FCC kicks off its first Spectrum auction in 4 years. The United States Space Command launches a new series of war games. AMSAT is getting ready for Field Day. A change in radio frequency causes drones at a show to fall out of the sky. That's an interesting story. An Ohio 100-kilowatt station is taken off the air by thieves taking down their coax line in broad daylight. We will tell you that story. And our closing story this week is entitled, School is Now in Session. We will have that and a lot more for you straight ahead in this week's report.
These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Ono Bin Shop, VK6 FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio returns to his Bald Yak project. This edition is entitled Soapy Audio Adventures. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us back to the summer of 1924, which brought the first explorers to the 4 new shorter wavelength bands that were opened up to amateur use in July. This is part 2 of a 3-part edition entitled DX Records and Shortwave Reflections, or The Heaviside Road to Antipode. We will stop by and visit with Bill Salyers, AJ8B, in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, and upcoming contests, and much more. And we will have this month's brand new report from the Volunteer Monitoring System. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service. This Week in Amateur Radio starts right now.
Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside of Albany, New York, where we are falling into the typical New York summer weather pattern of hot, bright, sunny weekdays and cold, damp, wet weekends, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in Cortlandville, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting from our news bureau in western Wisconsin, where the antenna farm is growing faster than the corn, I'm Marvin Turner, W0MET.
Reporting from our studios in beautiful Orland Park, Illinois, where summer, or at least spring, has finally arrived, I'm Mike Nikolich, K9DX Mike.
And reporting from the Ham Shack TV studios in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I'm getting ready for the ARRL International Digital Contest, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where it's finally warm, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the grass is growing uncontrolled and it looks like it'll be a great hay season here, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where spring has sprung, fall has fell, summer's come, and it's hotter than usual. And I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Hello, everyone. Before we get into this week's newscast, I'd like to tell everyone that This Week in Amateur Radio now has its own Discord server. That's right, a place online where we can discuss everything technology and amateur radio. So join us. Just go to Discord on your computer or download the Discord app on your portable device and search for TWIAR or This Week in Amateur Radio. We look forward to seeing you on the new This Week in Amateur Radio Discord server.
The National Research Council of Canada, or NRC, has announced that the shortwave broadcast of Canada's official time signal station, CHU, will be discontinued on June 22nd, 2026. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, is here with all the details.
Including experimental time broadcast in 1923 under the call sign 9CC and then VE9OB, CHU began regular broadcast in 1938. The station broadcast on three frequencies, 3330, 7850, and 14670 kilohertz. CHU is the equivalent to WWV and WWVH time stations operated by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology in the United States, which began operating with experimental broadcast in 1919 and regular broadcast in 2026. In Canada, there has been widespread unofficial speculation as to why CHU is being shut down. The letter reached out and received this statement from Deval Patel, Technical Officer, Meteorology, National Research Council Canada, and the Government of Canada. He says the National Research Council of Canada, NRC, through its Metrology Research Centre, is responsible for maintaining and disseminating Canada's official time signal, the SI second, and Coordinated Universal Time, UTC. Since 1970, the CHU shortwave radio service has been one of several methods used by the NRC to distribute accurate time information. On June 22, 2026, the NRC will discontinue the CHU broadcast to focus resources on its core mandate of maintaining the accuracy, reliability, and continuity of Canada's official time scale and time dissemination services. This includes supporting Canada's contribution to Coordinated Universal Time, UTC, and providing time services relied upon by millions of users and government departments for network time synchronization. While the CHU broadcast has been retired, Canadians can continue to have access to the NRC official time signal, though, the NRC web clock, the telephone talking clock, and the Network Time Protocol NTP services. Radio Amateurs of Canada President Alan Boyd, VE3AJB, said the decision to shut down CHU is of concern. The decision to discontinue CHU time signal service is both concerning and disappointing for the amateur radio community and many others across Canada. For decades, CHU has provided a reliable national standard for time and frequency calibration, serving not only radio amateurs but also educational, scientific, and technical users. CHU is the latest Canadian station to be shut down. On March 16, 2026, Environmental Canada permanently shut down the VHF Weather Radio Canada transmitter network and the Hello Weather telephone service after exactly 50 years of continuous service. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
WWVH broadcasts time and frequency information 24 hours per day from the island of Kauai, Hawaii. As Canada's National Amateur Radio Association, Radio Amateurs of Canada recognizes the historical and practical importance of this service and regrets the loss of a unique Canadian resource that has been a trusted part of our communications infrastructure for generations. Thanks to the National Research Council of Canada and the Radio Amateurs of Canada for their contributions to this story.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The Citizen Science Investigation Organization, AMSAT, has asked Canadian officials to halt their planned shutdown later this month of its shortwave time signal station, CHU, saying it has unique and irreplaceable value to researchers and the international scientific community. A statement on AMSAT's website praises CHU for its long-standing role as a resource in auroral research. Its unprecedented citizen science study of the 2024 solar eclipse over North America also relied heavily on CHU's capabilities. The statement says, in part, the use of time-standard beacons as ionospheric signals of opportunity dates back more than a century to the earliest days of radio science. Today, this time-tested approach is supercharged by inexpensive single-board computers, software-defined radios, and the participation of the global amateur radio and shortwave listener community, who have built a growing meta-instrument that spans the continent of North America and points beyond. HAMSA's flagship project, the Personal Space Weather Station Network, is also closely intertwined with CHU and its remote sensing capabilities. There was no statement released in response by the recipient, Dr. Marina Gertzwov of the National Research Council.
An unlicensed radio operator who has been convicted of jamming a local repeater several times has just been issued yet another FCC warning. Acting on several interference complaints from amateur radio operators in California, the U.S. Federal Communications Commission had issued a warning to a radio operator who has a long history of unlicensed, disruptive, and illegal transmissions on a local repeater. The FCC sent a notice of unlicensed operation in late May to Jack Gerritsen of Bell, California, saying that in March, agents with direction-finding equipment had verified reports of his 2-meter transmission on a local repeater. The FCC said the agents heard him make statements over the air using a phrase, "Jack is back," identifying himself. Over the past 2 decades, Gerritsen's encounters with the legal system and FCC have landed him in court and prison. He received a 1-year sentence in 2000 following his conviction in state court of interfering with the Highway Patrol's radio system. Upon his release, he took and passed his technician level exam, receiving the amateur radio call sign KG6 IRO. The FCC revoked the license grant days later. In November 2001, after realizing Gerritsen had been convicted of public safety interference and that the license was granted mistakenly, according to various reports, he remained on the air presence despite that. FCC records show he was later sent a forfeiture order of $21,000 for interfering with Coast Guard auxiliary communications with a sailing vessel in distress. He was convicted in September of 2006 at the age of 70 for malicious interference with radio and unlicensed transmissions. He was fined and sentenced to 7 years in prison. The latest notice from the FCC, dated May 28th, gives him 10 days to respond and orders him to immediately halt all transmissions.
The ARRL is pleased to introduce a new member benefit, the QST Product Review Comparison Database. With all the details on this exciting new offering, we go to League headquarters where John Ross, KD8IDJ, has this special report.
This online tool makes it easier to compare amateur radio transceivers, receivers, amplifiers, and transmitters by allowing users to sort and filter equipment based on their own selection criteria. This tool, introduced by the ARRL Lab, offers a familiar experience for anyone who has shopped online in recent years, said ARRL Laboratory Manager George Spada, W1GKS. For decades, the lab has been making standardized measurements that are publicized in QST product reviews. While those reviews have long been available online, finding and comparing products often required knowing exactly what you were looking for. The new database makes it much easier to discover and evaluate equipment based on the characteristics that matter most to you. The tool has a lot of flexibility in the ways that you can sort data. Options include sorting the product by name, chronologically, from newest to oldest, published, and alphabetically. And whether you're purchasing your first radio or considering an upgrade to your current station, the QST Product Review Comparison Database provides an objective, data-driven, customizable way to evaluate equipment. A companion guide explaining the various measurements and specifications is also planned to help members better understand the technical data when making an informed purchasing decision. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The comparison database includes ARRL lab-tested devices in previously listed categories, dating back to 2012. Users can apply filters to narrow results to specific types of equipment and then sort products using select specifications and laboratory measurements. Multiple products can be selected and compared side by side, making it easier to evaluate options before making a purchase decision. The data columns can be sorted by performance, metric, and columns can easily be rearranged to display information in the order most useful to the user. If you know the name of the device you'd like to view, there is a search field available as well. When 2 or more products are selected for comparison, the results open in a new browser tab, allowing users to keep their place in the main database. To access this new member benefit, log into the ARRL website and visit compare.arrl.org.
FCC Chairman Brendan Carr today welcomed the start of the first FCC Spectrum auction in 4 years. The AWS-3 auction will offer 200 5G-grade Spectrum licenses that laid fallow for more than a decade. The license areas included in this auction are home to over 100 million consumers across 48 states, 2 U.S. territories, and the Gulf of America. They include major markets like New York, Chicago, Boston, Tampa, and Charlotte. Bidding in the AWS auction, formerly designated as Auction 113, began this morning. The auction makes available Spectrum licenses in the 1,695 to 1,710 MHz, 1,755 to 1,780 MHz, and 2,155 to 2,180 MHz bands. The auction makes over 1.4 billion megahertz population available for auction, a metric calculated by multiplying the bandwidth by the population covered by the licenses. The auction started today utilizes rules the Commission proposed and adopted last year. The licenses made available had been auctioned in 2014 for commercial use, but were the subject of defaults or bid withdrawals. As a result, these 200 licenses were unsold in the prior auction, and the spectrum has remained in the FCC's inventory ever since. Today's auction will put those spectrum licenses to productive use. The proceeds from this auction will fund the FCC's Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Reimbursement Program, commonly known as RIP and Replace, which seeks to remove untrustworthy technology from U.S. communications networks. The FCC's Build America agenda is putting in the work to free up airwaves and restore the country's leadership in wireless.
The Suffolk County, New York legislature has designated June as Amateur Radio Month. The effort included members and officers of the Suffolk County Radio Club, Radio Central Amateur Radio Club, Great South Bay Amateur Radio Club, Long Island Mobile Amateur Radio Club, and the Peconic Amateur Radio Club. The Suffolk County Radio Club recently hosted an Amateur Radio Day event where local town and county legislators and community members saw amateur radio in action. Demonstrations featured WinLink, HF, VHF, UHF, Mesh-tastic, and software-defined radio operating without relying on traditional infrastructure, showcasing the capabilities of both everyday and emergency off-grid communications.
The Radio Society of Great Britain Exams team has published a new mock exam paper for foundation and intermediate levels. There are 3 for each level, and you can find them on the RSGB website at rsgb.org/mock-exams. These take into account all the changes to the UK syllabus and exam question bank, which has been made since the last sets of mock exam papers were published. The exams team reminds us that mock papers for the full level, in fact the entire full license question bank, are available online. Candidates and trainers can create their own full-level mock papers using questions at the rsgb.org exam questions site. In other news from the RSGB, they'll be running a practical and thought-provoking workshop for radio amateurs, makers, and home constructors who want to understand what AI really is, what it's good for, and where it can go wrong and why it matters. The session will run during the RSGB convention on both Saturday the 10th and Sunday the 11th of October.
The Santa Barbara Wireless Foundation announced that Kenneth Smith, AA7KS, a senior at the Valley Christian Academy, was selected as the 2026 recipient of its annual $1,000 scholarship, awarded to an outstanding local high school graduate who plans to pursue higher education in the fields of science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. Smith is graduating with a 4.0 GPA and plans to study chemical engineering at Oregon State University in the fall. He holds an amateur radio extra class license and is an active student on campus and in the community, and has been a member of the Satellite Amateur Radio Club, W6AB, for more than 3 years. He also restarted Northern Santa Barbara County Amateur Radio Emergency Services in Santa Maria and acted as the organization's emergency coordinator. This scholarship will help me attend Oregon State University, which is an extremely highly rated school for chemistry and chemical engineering, said Smith. I will have access to high-quality education and training as an engineer while still being close enough to fulfill my responsibilities in taking care of my parents' farm for them. Brian Milburn, the president and CEO of the Santa Barbara Wireless Foundation, said the search is always on looking for talented students. We look for students who have the potential to turn technical skills into service for their community, said Milburn. Kenneth doesn't just show that potential, he's already acted on it. We're proud to support his pathway into higher education. The Santa Barbara Wireless Foundation is a nonprofit public benefit organization that develops and supports wireless telecommunications technologies in support of the public safety, emergency communications, community service, and scientific research in the Santa Barbara region. The foundation supports local amateur radio activities and services through the Santa Barbara Amateur Radio Club, an ARRL-affiliated club.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio. It is the beginning of the new month, and it's time for this month's edition of the Volunteer Monitoring Report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between the ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is this month's activity report of the VM program. Technician operators in Michigan, Oregon, Utah, and Connecticut were issued advisory notices for 40-meter FT8 operation, a band on which technicians have no FT8 privileges but are allowed CW operation. Technician operators in Illinois, California, and Colorado were issued advisory notices for 20-meter FT8 operation, a band on which technicians have no privileges. An advisory notice was issued to an operator in Indiana concerning his operation on an expired license. An operator in Colorado was issued a commendation for outstanding operation in the America 250 special event. His operation was efficient and courteous and complied exactly with the FCC's identification requirements for special events. A new automated FT4, FT8 monitoring system has begun generating incident reports. The new system appears to be very effective and fair in continuously monitoring data frequencies to ensure that operators have the proper license for the band on which they are using FT4 and FT8. An operator in Texas was issued an advisory notice concerning operating a repeater on an expired license. The matter was resolved informally by telephone. Retail chain stores in Appleton and Neenah, Wisconsin were issued advisory notices concerning unlicensed operation on 430.225 MHz, which is allocated to the amateur radio service. An operator in Texas was issued an advisory notice concerning wide signals and splatter on 14.213 MHz. The signals extended from 24.210 to 24.219 MHz. A repeater owner in California was cautioned about allowing non-amateurs in a volunteer watch group to use the repeater in non-emergency situations. Technician operators in Indiana and North Carolina were issued advisory notices concerning FT8 operations on 20 and 40 meters. Technicians have no operating authority on 20 meters and only CW authority on 40 meters. This was the first use of the new automated FT8 monitoring system established for the VM program to continuously monitor data frequencies. An operator in Vermont was issued a commendation for excellence in CW operation. An operator in Mississippi received a commendation for extra efforts to find a frequency for a W1AW/4 America 250 operation. An operator in Florida, meanwhile, received a commendation for exceptional efficiency and courtesy during a Parks on the Air activation. There were 2 meetings with the FCC Enforcement Bureau concerning enforcement issues on 7.200 MHz. A presentation on the VM program was given in person to the Forsyth Amateur Radio Club in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and 1 FCC meeting concerning continuing enforcement issues on the 40-meter SSB bands. The totals for this month's monitoring were 1,964 hours on HF frequencies and 2,560 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 4,524 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
The following story was written by Alan Boyd, VE3AJB, President, Radio Amateurs of Canada. Radio Amateurs of Canada has received the news that RIC Vice President Brent Taylor, VY2HF, became a silent key on May 21 at the age of 66. Brent was first licensed in 1984 as VE1APG and received his partial HF privileges 6 months later. 1 year later, he passed his advanced exam and obtained the call sign VE1JH, a call he used for more than 20 years. Brent was widely respected for his dedication to amateur radio and his strong belief in supporting amateur radio organizations. He helped grow the amateur radio community in the Charlottetown area as an organizer and instructor for the Charlottetown Amateur Radio Club's Basic Amateur Course. Brent was a member of the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Charlottetown Amateur Radio Club, the International Repeater Group, New Brunswick, the Amateur Radio Relay League, Radio Society of Great Britain, AMSAT, the National Radio Club, and the Canadian International DX Club. Outside of amateur radio, Brent worked for the Federal Department of Veterans Affairs as acting manager and responsible of the database that holds the Veterans Affairs client information. Prior to that, he served 10 years as a member of the Veterans Review and Appeal Board. Earlier in his career, Brent worked as an educator, a radio broadcaster, a newspaper columnist, and served 1 term as a member of the Legislative Assembly of New Brunswick. Over the years, Brent served the amateur radio community in many leadership roles. He was a past president of the Fredericton Amateur Radio Club and the New Brunswick Amateur Radio Association. He was also involved with the Canadian Amateur Radio Federation and the Canadian Radio Relay League prior to their merger. In September of 2020, Brent was appointed as a trustee of the Canadian Amateur Radio Hall of Fame, representing Prince Edward Island for a 3-year term. Brent and I were elected and appointed as president and vice president in November of 2024. As a former vice president myself, I had ideas about the direction I wanted to take the REC, and it was Brent who helped guide me in many decisions. He was my rock within the organization, someone I could always bounce ideas off, and he would honestly tell me whether I was heading in the right direction. We were a team. I knew Brent always had my back, and he knew I had his. We recently returned from Ottawa, where we worked together at the headquarters discussing plans and ideas for the coming year. His death has come as a tremendous shock and represents a deep personal and organizational loss, not only of a trusted colleague, but a close friend. Brent Taylor, VY2HF, will never be forgotten by amateur radio and by everyone who had the privilege of knowing him. 7-3. Alan Boyd, VE3AJB, President, Radio Amateurs of Canada. On a personal note, Brent was an anchor for This Week in Amateur Radio during our early years, when we distributed by satellite. He played an important part in the history of our news service. We're sorry to learn of his passing. 7-3, Brent, from all of us here at This Week in Amateur Radio.
Evan Adkins, Director of Engineering, called Mike Kurtner, the president of Kindred Communications, last Thursday just prior to lunchtime. "Are you sitting down?" Adkins asked Kurtner after he answered the phone. Kurtner, 75, has seen a lot in his time as a broadcast owner in the tri-state area of Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio, along the Ohio River. One of his AM station's copper radials once fell victim to a copper thief cutting its wires. But an FM transmission line being snapped and cleared in broad daylight? He couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. The alleged perpetrator, Paul Crisp of Catlettsburg, according to WSAZ-TV's reporting, had severed the main transmission line leading up to the broadcast tower of 93.7 WDGG-FM, a 100,000-watt country-formatted FM station licensed to Ashland, Kentucky, which goes by the moniker The Dog. Kurtner isn't sure how the suspect is still alive. He was lucky in that he didn't die. He was unlucky that he got caught, Kurtner said. The cable crosses a bridge from the transmitter building and then runs up the tower located on Musser Lane in Catlettsburg, and Kirtner said the thief cut all of it. Crisp, according to Kirtner, allegedly dragged the heavy line down to his house, only a few hundred yards over a hill from the tower site, and had already cut it into smaller sections, presumably in an attempt to scrap the copper out of the wire. Kirtner suspected the perpetrator must have scoped out the theft in advance, including disabling the site's video surveillance system prior to cutting the lines. WSAZ reported there was also a copper theft at the same site on May 23rd. It was definitely well thought out, he said. The Boyd County, Kentucky Sheriff's Office later obtained a search warrant, discovered the cut-up transmission line in his yard, and obtained a warrant for Crisp's arrest. WSAZ said Crisp was apprehended after a short pursuit by deputies and charged with second-degree fleeing or evading police, among other offenses. WDGG was left with its Class C 1FM signal off the air. Kirtner said the station is currently operating at heavily reduced power, around 10 watts, utilizing both a backup transmitter and an auxiliary antenna. WDGG's damaged transmission line itself, Kirtner noted, is of an unusual size. Because the lines contain pressurized gases, simply splicing the cut pieces back together introduces a risk of gas leaks. As a result, Kirtner is seeking to source an alternative route. Total repair costs, he estimates, are somewhere between $70,000 and $100,000, as the line can run as much as $160 per foot. Adkins is spearheading the recovery efforts, putting together cost estimates and coordinating with the station's insurance company. He comes from a lineage of engineering. Adkins' late father, Virgil, was a longtime chief engineer for Daystar Television Networks. He's been a godsend working through all of this, Kirtner said of his director of engineering. The station's tower climbing crew is on notice, and Kirtner hopes to have a direct transmission path installed and operational by June 5th, though he emphasized that it will take more time to resume at full broadcast power. Kirtner and Adkins are also still unclear if the main antenna itself suffered electrical or physical damage from the incident. WDGG is one of 7 stations operated by Kirtner's group. He's been moved by the response in and around Huntington, Ashland, and beyond. Because we're locally owned, listeners see this as a community business that's been attacked, Kirtner said. At church services on Sunday, for example, he had several congregation members come up to him to offer their support. Even if they aren't around-the-clock listeners, he explained, they see the stations active around the tri-state area. Kirtner's stations offer a weekly street promotion, 9th Street Live, which transforms a block of downtown Huntington, West Virginia, into a Friday night of live music and food from local vendors. WDGG is also running the 22nd annual Dog Dazzle from Huntington's Harris Riverfront Park this July 3rd, which features plenty of patriotic fireworks. It draws approximately 15,000 people each year, Kirtner said, with West Virginia-based artists in conjunction with both local, county, and city governments. It just benefits everybody, and I think that was one of the reasons people were so sympathetic to us on what has happened, Kirtner said. They're very familiar with our promotional events. Kirtner is not sure if the incident could have been prevented, but he warns even FM station owners. A copper theft, rendering your station completely off the air, can happen any place, any time. Criminal intent is hard to avoid, he said. Looking back, Kirtner may have sought to have around 200 feet of transmission line available. Easier said than done because of the unusual size, he added.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. As we normally do, let's start with some updates on upcoming DXpeditions. First, we have 6 Oscar from Somalia. Oscar November 5 Uniform Radio says that the 6 Oscar 6 X-ray team is now complete as they welcome Paul N6 PSE and PA7DX, who bring experience and enthusiasm. They depart from Ethiopia March 13th for Hargeisa, then on to Barara as their operational site, and expect to be active officially on February 15th, 2027. For 12 days, they will be on the air 24 hours a day. The major challenges are the logistics, transportation, setup, reliable power, and good propagation. That's a tough part of the world, so good luck to them. Next, we have an update on the ongoing operation at the South Shetland Islands, which is Victor Papa Zero Stroke Hotel. Hotel Fox Zero Papa Alpha Sierra says, quote, "The power of nature has shown its face," end quote, with 78-mile-per-hour winds, which destroyed the mast and the antennas were damaged. So the work on them was temporarily suspended due to the weather. At last report, the wind was down to 45 miles per hour. Op Rafale, Sierra Quebec 4 Oscar, is at Arktowski, the Polish Antarctic station on King George Island, until October of this year. So you'll have a good chance to get them in the log. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com, and I'll fix you up. From Rwanda, which is 9 X-ray, we have this. Alan, Fox 8 Fox Uniform Alpha, is active holiday style as 9 X-ray 5 Kilo Mike from Kigali, Rwanda until June 13th. He operates CW sideband and digital modes on all HF bands with possible 160-meter activity depending on local conditions. His station has a hex beam, dipoles, and verticals. From Juan Fernandez Island, which is 3 Golf 0 Zulu, we have this, quote, "Here's a 10-day update. 10 days after the start of the DXpedition, I have reached 15,000 QSOs across different bands and modes from 160 through 10 meters. The first contact was made on 160 FT8 with Papa Yankee 2 Kilo Mike. Immediately afterwards, several signals began appearing on the waterfall, mainly from Europe and North America. This antenna setup provides full coverage from 160 through 10 meters. The weather conditions on the island have been excellent, with temperatures ranging from 15 degrees C to 21 degrees C, and a light breeze throughout the day in general. It has been very pleasant. Keeping an eye to the low bands, remember to look for 3 Golf 0 Zulu as we are on the air, and they're doing a great job. Alberto, Victor Radio 2 X-Ray Alpha November, is now QRV as XX9 Tango X-Ray November from Macau until June 9th. Single sideband CW and FT8 on all bands 160 through 6, quote, with a special focus on North America, end quote. He says he will attempt single sideband on 80 meters and maybe some 160. And you can QSL XX9 TXN to Italy Victor 3 Sierra Kilo Bravo. Olafor, Tango Fox 1 Oscar Lima, and his wife will be on Boa Vista Island, Cape Verde, from June 12th to June 23rd for a 10-day stay. During this time, he will be active on FT8 and FT4 on 80 through 6 meters under the call sign of Delta 4 Oscar Lima. Chris, Victor Kilo 2 Charlie Japan Radio, operating as 3 Delta 2 Charlie Japan Radio, is operating holiday style until June 9th around Nadi and the Fiji Islands, with possible short visits to a few outlier islands. He is operating mostly 20 meters, probably using FT8 when time and conditions allow, with modest power of between 30 and 50 watts, and a vertical or simple dipole depending on the location. As he is traveling light and prioritizing family time, this will be a casual trip with some radio activity rather than a full DXpedition. Logs will most likely be uploaded after the trip due to limited internet access. Casimir, Delta Lima 2 Sugar Bravo Yankee, is QRV from Zanzibar as 5 Hotel 1 Kilo Bravo until June 12th. He will be QRV from the Seychelles Islands as Sugar 79 stroke Delta Lima 2 Sugar Bravo Yankee from September 11th to the 21st, so a few months from now. He says that the Zanzibar trip is a follow-up on his celebration last April of 50 years of radio amateur, but with a better location and better antennas. He will use an ICOM IC7300 with an amplifier and vertical antenna. I have an update from the Victor Julia 2 Lima team, which is on Lord Howe Island. Quote, We arrived here safely on Monday, June 1st, and by 6 p.m. we had all 3 stations up and running. 2 Flex Radio Aurora 520Ms and a trusty old IC7000 dedicated for FT8. Antennas are a DX Commander and an 80-meter doublet with a second short vertical for the IC7000. Bands are planned as 80 through 10 meters CW sideband and FT8. Today there was an M-class flare which depressed conditions noticeably, but we're hopeful the impact will pass this evening. We have the benefit of the Iona sound on Norfolk Island, and it confirmed that the muff dropped to below 7 megahertz. Even on 7 megahertz, conditions into Japan and North America have been very disappointing this evening. And a first for our team, we're using Club Log Livestream. Check it out if you haven't used it before. It's a great way to see what bands we are on and who we are working, not to mention getting near real-time confirmation of your QSO. If you need, or just want, Lord Howe Island in your log, continue to listen out for us. We're here until 14th June, running 3 stations. And that's 73 from Chris, Victor Kilo 3, Quebec Bravo. Sierra Uniform 8, Sierra Oscar Sierra, or SU-8-SOS, is an Egyptian amateur radio society activity focused on emergency communications, public demonstrations, and training for licensed operators and young volunteers to support relief, rescue, and community service during emergencies and disasters. The SU-8-SOS team will be active until June 10th on sideband FT8 Foxhound across all HF bands, with QSL management by VE1AYM. More details, updates, and event photos are available on QRZ.com on the SU-8-SOS page. We have an update from Easter Island, Charlie Echo Zero Yankee. From June 20 to the 27th, the CE3YMR Manu will be active from Rapa Nui, which is Easter Island, under the call sign of 3 Golf Zero Yankee Mike. The focus will be on 6, 30, and 40-meter bands, with possible activity on 10, 20, and 60, depending on propagation. Operations will use FT8 and single sideband modes. Although this takes place during a family vacation, the goal is to maximize contacts for the worldwide DX community during this second activation from the island. 5 Hotel, Tanzania. Echo Alpha 5, Juliet Victor Whiskey. Alex is QRV is 5 Hotel 3 Victor Whiskey from Tanzania and Zanzibar Island until June 10th. This will be a holiday-style operation from various locations around Zanzibar Island and Tanzania. Activity is expected daily between 1530 and 1700 UTC, subject to travel plans and propagation conditions. Operations will be mainly on 20 meters with possible activity on 40 using single sideband. QSL will be available via QRZ Log, EQSL, and the Bureau. From the Maldives, which is A Quebec, we get this. A Quebec 7 Mike Lima will be active from Mbudu Island, Maldives, June 7th to June 14th. The operator is LU8 Mike India Lima Ivan, and he plans a holiday-style operation mainly on 20 through 6 meter bands with possible 40 meters using FT8 and single sideband. This week, the DX Mentor podcast will feature a discussion with Bill, W4WV, who is the president of the Guantanamo Bay Amateur Radio Club. You can learn a lot about Guantanamo Bay, their members, as well as the relationship they have with Cuba. Check it out and let me know what you think. If you have questions or you need information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pileups. Have a great DX week.
Senator Ted Cruz, in a strong pre-Memorial Day message, publicly highlighted the critical role that amateur radio service volunteers play during disasters, praising and thanking ham radio operators who provide essential communications when storms and emergencies knock out power and cellular networks and communities are cut off. Here with more details on Senator Cruz's message, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this report from League headquarters.
Senator Ted Cruz is praising amateur radio operators for their role in emergency preparedness and disaster response. In a recent video message, Cruz thanked hams for providing critical communications when storms and emergencies knock out power, cellular service, and internet connectivity. Cruz said that when communities are cut off, it's hams who step forward to reconnect people when it matters most. He pointed to the response from hams serving their communities during past disasters, including last year's devastating flooding in central Texas that swept through Camp Mystic. As the nation enters another summer storm season, Cruz said the role of amateur radio remains as important as ever. ready to respond, ready to serve, and ready to make a difference. Senator Cruz is chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. His comments came as ARRL continues its nationwide adequacy effort, supporting the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act. The bipartisan legislation would help amateur radio operators install and maintain effective outdoor antennas at homes where private land use restrictions might otherwise prohibit them. The goal is to ensure communities maintain resilient emergency communications during disasters. ARRL's grassroots campaign has now generated more than 155,000 letters to members of Congress. ARRL Legislative Committee Chairman and West Gulf Coast Division Director John Robert Stratton, N5AUS, said Senator Cruz's public comments are evidence that support for amateur radio continues to grow on Capitol Hill. To join the ARRL letter-writing campaign to support the act, visit www.arrl.org/HOA. Senator Cruz's video message can be viewed on the ARRL HQ YouTube channel. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
He emphasized that as the nation prepares for yet another summer storm season, ham radio's role remains just as vital as ever, stating that while future emergencies will come, Senator Cruz pointed out that so would amateur radio, ready to respond, ready to serve, and to make a difference. He ended his statements thanking ham radio for its courage and commitment, noting that amateur radio's work strengthens our communities. His comments also reflect growing congressional recognition of the value amateur radio operators bring to communities across the country. ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, continues to advocate for legislation that protects and strengthens amateur radio's role in emergency preparedness and public service communications. The most recent proof that those efforts have and are increasing congressional support for amateur radio is evidenced by the decision of Chairman Cruz to publicly share his personal views on the value and importance of amateur radio to the nation, Stratton said.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Previously, I've talked about a piece of software called SOAPy Audio. It's part of the toolkit called SOAPy SDR, which in turn is part of a whole ecosystem called the Pothos Framework, coordinated by Pothosware, founded by Josh Bloom. I'm mentioning this for two reasons. First, to give credit to Josh and the many contributions he has made to the software-defined radio ecosystem, and second, to indicate that there's several moving parts here. SOAPy Audio is a module that connects an audio device, like a microphone or speaker, more on that in a moment, to a tool called SOAPy SDR. This allows you to connect to that device, either directly or over the network, from within any SOAPy-compatible SDR tool, like Cubic SDR, SDR Angel, Quisk, and SDR++, to name a few. Said differently, you can use the SOAPy Audio module to pretend that your sound card is a software-defined radio, and use the associated SDR tools to use it. While interesting in and of itself, the idea comes into focus if you consider that you could connect your analog radio to the sound card, and now you have actual radio frequencies coming into your card, which you can use as an SDR. This works because SOAPy Audio also includes hamlib support, which in turn means that you can send commands like set the frequency or set the mode to your radio using hamlib. Better yet, if you do this within your SDR software, all this happens behind the scenes. Now, before I dig in too much more, I mentioned a microphone and speaker. When you connect your radio to a computer, the microphone, or line-in socket, is used to receive audio from the radio. It leaves the radio and enters the computer via the microphone and gives you the ability to receive audio. Alternatively, when you connect the computer speaker to the radio, it leaves the computer and enters the radio to transmit audio. Right now, I see no evidence that SOPI audio supports the ability to transmit, and the ecosystem overview shows the module in a different location than the other radio modules. It might well transpire that none of this is going to work long term, but the point of this is to learn how it works and to get an understanding of how data flows back and forth. Ideally, I'd end up with a module that would integrate into GNU Radio using the existing SOPI SDR integration, but I'm nowhere near that, and my ongoing computing challenges keep banging me in the face, so small steps. If you're not quite sure how this is supposed to work, your radio is connected to your computer using audio in and out, as well as a serial or USB connection. The computer is running SOPI audio, which uses hamlib to control the radio, and uses SOPI SDR to send and receive both control and radio signals through a tool called SOPI Server, which I think will all run on a cheap Raspberry Pi, which in turn is connected to the network to another more beefy computer running GNU Radio and the SOPI SDR module, allowing you to both control the radio over the network as well as receive and transmit. Well, at least that's the plan. In order to bring that grand idea closer to fruition, I've just spent the past 2 days putting together a set of instructions in the form of a Docker file to attempt to help make that happen. I'll note up front that this is a work in progress, and there were plenty of trips to the local yak shaving compound to sharpen my blades, but I think by now you'll understand that this is par for the course. I'm sharing all this with you because in amateur radio, and in any complex endeavour, progress is made by making small incremental improvements. We're up to the 19th or 20th if you count the introduction of my Bold Yak series, and so far I have only very little tangible assets to show you. I suspect that this is going to be the case for some time to come. Perhaps my journey should be viewed as a way to pursue the things you're interested in and document your progress along the way, rather than a journey towards a product that you can install tomorrow morning after you've had your morning coffee. If all that made your head explode, don't worry, you're in good company. I embarrassed myself in front of all the ham-sci community the other day when I proposed to use a spectrogram to capture and understand ionosonde data rather than raw IQ. I still don't know what I was thinking. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
The Fort Myers Amateur Radio Club and the Lee County Amateur Radio Emergency Service in Florida are preparing now for ARRL Field Day. The 24-hour event will begin at noon on Saturday, June 27th, 2026, and run continuously until noon on Sunday, June 28th at the North Fort Myers Community Park. Both clubs are aware that when severe weather hits or a hurricane strikes Florida, the state's digital infrastructure, cell towers, fiber optic internet, and power grids often fail due to high winds, catastrophic storm surges, and prolonged blackouts. In those critical moments, when conventional networks go completely dark, amateur radio operators step in, serving as the ultimate off-grid communications safety net to bridge the gap and save lives. ARRL Field Day is the most popular on-the-air amateur radio event in the U.S. and Canada, drawing over 31,000 participants annually, and the Fort Myers clubs are not alone preparing for disasters. Field Day is a great opportunity for all amateur clubs to get involved. This year's Field Day theme is Amateur Radio, a national resource, and combined with the ARRL Year of the Club, it provides the perfect opportunity for radio clubs to set up stations in public places to demonstrate ham radio science, skill, and service to our communities and nation. As an added incentive for anyone participating in the ARRL year-long America's 250 Worked All States Award, contacts made with ARRL-affiliated radio clubs anytime this year, including during Field Day, will count towards the America 250 Worked All States affiliated club endorsement. Check out those details at arrl.org/America250. All of the information you need to get started can be found on the Field Day webpage, including how to join the ARRL Field Day Facebook group, where you can share your plans, tips, and tricks for a successful field day.
In Australia, the Sydney drone shows are cancelled for now after a malfunction saw 89 drones fall into the harbour. The drone's show operator says a change in radio frequency caused 89 drones to fall into the harbor around Cockle Bay. The incident occurred not long into the starbound show when almost 90 drones began falling out of formation and into the harbor. Operator Sky Magic said the 89 drones landed in the water after an unforeseen change in the radio frequency environment, which compromised positional accuracy and triggered emergency landings. This anomaly caused a number of drones in the fleet to enact fail-safe landing procedures in response to compromised positional accuracy, their statement read. The Australian Transportation Safety Bureau has opened an investigation. Destination NSW CEO Karen Jones confirmed there was no deliberate interference and praised the functioning of exclusion zones.
On June 12, 2026, the Japan Amateur Radio League will mark the 100th anniversary of its founding. There's a lot to be said about being 100 years old, and in Japan, amateur radio operators plan to say plenty on behalf of amateur radio, which is about to reach its centennial. This year and next year are milestone years for ham radio operators in Japan. The Japan Amateur Radio League marks its 100th anniversary this month, and the issuing of the Japan call sign Juliet X-Ray Alpha X-Ray to Japan's first licensed amateur radio station marks its own centennial next year. In September 1927, Juliet X-Ray Alpha X-Ray went on the air as an experimental shortwave radio telegraph and telephone station. Now, hams are setting aside the next 16 months to mark both moments in history. A full range of commemorative activities are planned from this month through September 30th, 2027. Operating activities, awards, and both the 2026 and 2027 Tokyo Ham Fairs, the world's largest ham radio event, are part of the plans, along with a commemorative publication and opening ceremony. So turn your attention and maybe your antennas towards Japan. Things are about to start happening. More information is available on the web at 100th.jarl.org.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Welcome to the 53rd segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. With our gratitude to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website for these segments, we bring you this, the next chapter of ham radio history. DX Records and Shortwave Reflections, or the Heaviside Road to the Antipode. This is part 2 of this segment. On 8 December, the Haverford College, Pennsylvania chess team played a game via amateur radio with a team from Oxford that had traveled 70 miles to the home of Marcuse at G2NM. U3OT hosted the Haverford side. It was not the first chess game played on the air, but was certainly the first international one. Haverford had previously played chess with a group at the City College of New York. The two stations tested conditions at various wavelengths, finally arriving at sufficient reliability on 85 meters. The game did not conclude, but went for 5.5 hours and 11 moves for each side, at which point the two sides agreed to continue in January. Warner wondered whether Godley ever thought that just a few years after his memorable visit to England, we would be playing 5.5-hour chess matches across the puddle. International QSOs were now occurring nightly between all continents, all in the wavelength range of 75 to 100 meters, still only a small step beyond the previous year's work. UK and NZ stations, now in regular contact at dawn and dusk, respectively, reported that it was easier than contacting the U.S. and attributed that to the antipodal effects rather than the as yet unknown gray line propagation. It also implied that the signals were going via the long path throwing most common held notions of DX limits out the window. This alone should have ended all the talk about antipodes. With thus auspicious a curtain rise, who can say what the season has in store for us? Apparently there is no end to the possibilities. Just think, we haven't plumbed the shorter wavebands yet, wrote Warner. What he referred to as shorter wavelengths were still largely a mystery. Recent tests demonstrated that 220 miles could be covered on 40 meters in daylight, something not possible on any other wavelength as far as was known, making the band very interesting to experimenters. Referring to 20 and 5 meters as extremely short wavelengths, at this point they were touted as being free from interference and nothing more. To encourage amateurs to explore new allocations, the ARRL established awards for experimental operation, one for each new band. The rules emphasize low-power operation and limited transmitters to using a single tube rated at 5 watts. Because directly measured power was not yet easy to do, the rule was based solely on tube specifications. If you bent the rules, you risked burning out an expensive piece of equipment. The contest period, it was called that despite being billed as an experiment, would run nearly 4 months from 1 February to 25 May 1925. It was not fully QSO-based as contests are today. Contests mattered, of course, and counted in the score, but the event was more of a test, like the transatlantics, where one-way communications were the main objective. Any given transmission would be counted for the contest only when a receiving station confirmed it by letter, telegram, or postcard and agreed with the submitted transmission log. An entry consisted of complete logs and confirmations of transmissions, diagrams and photographs of the station, and a notarized sworn affidavit attesting to adherence to the rules. Excessively long CQing or other such calls could disqualify an entrant as would violating any of the rules. A 40-meter award, the Cooper Cup, was sponsored by J.C. Cooper of Atlanta, and 20 and 5-meter ARRL Cups were sponsored by the league itself. The announcement offered very little description of what would constitute a winning entry, but experimentation was the key. Crews emphasized that although QST had been publishing information about how to operate below 100 meters, the league had no monopoly on ideas. The way to get somewhere in this shortwave business is not to trail after someone else, but to make a trail of your own, he wrote. The 20-meter test results were encouraging despite a general lack of adherence to the schedules. While no nighttime signals got much further than about 100 miles, daylight QSOs were plentiful. Among the best were a QSO between Hoffman 9EK in Madison, Wisconsin, and Reinhardt's at 1XAM, who worked each other until signals dropped out around 4:40 p.m. Eastern Time. 6AJF had copied the entire QSO from California, too. Since it was about 2.5 years past the solar minimum, they may have randomly hit a particularly quiet string of nights for their test. A few days later, the pair made contact again, this time decreasing power to a very low level, 8.5 and 16 watts. On the heels of his QSO with 9EK, Reinhardt's worked 6TS on 20 for 14 consecutive days. They worked each other on 40 meters at night on those same days, also something new. It was all done with standard circuits, no trickery. It was just the latest demonstration of the usefulness of the short waves. Reinhardt's was also the first to cross the Atlantic on 20 in a QSO with G5LF. But as amazed as they were with 20 meters, they did not yet grasp the band's full potential. While the tests had provided brilliant proof that 20 meters is one of the most useful waves we have, they prematurely proclaimed the utter worthlessness of the band at night. William H. Schick, 2MU, had been listening on 40 meters from his Brooklyn home for some time, logging mostly harmonics. On 2 January 1925, he heard 6TS in Santa Monica and thought it was yet another harmonic until 6TS signed his call and added 40 meters to his identification. Such was the pervasiveness of harmonic generation. Using his one-tube Hartley oscillator feeding a 50-foot-long T antenna strung between the roofs of apartment buildings, 2MU returned the call. The two city dwellers established contact around 7 p.m., the first cross-country QSO on 40 meters. And in February, the first confirmed QSO between the U.S. and Japan took place when 6AWT worked JA2 at the Imperial Naval Academy in Nagasaki. Bartholomew Molinari, owner of 6AWT, was a baker who operated from his home on Union Street in San Francisco. By the end of the year, his station had been heard in multiple countries, on all continents, and he had worked all 48 states. Not due to any special equipment or antennas, his success rather stemmed directly from pushing to ever shorter wavelengths, brought about in part by necessity. He had originally moved down to concentrate his operation on 80 meters because with 50 broadcast listeners within a 6-block radius of his home, he could not use 200 meters lest he be deluged with interference complaints. He later received the 1924 Hoover Cup, following Don Wallace 9ZT the year before. More information can be found in the What is an Amateur segment. We'll continue this segment next week. Included in this material are quotes from the following. S. Cruz, 3 cups offered for shortwave work. QST 1925, page 17. Experimenter Section Report, QST, February 1925, page 31. Daylight Radio Communication Wins, QST, March 1925, page 9. Who was first across on 20 meters, QST, July 1925, page 30. Experimenter Section Report, QST, March 1925, page 50. 6TS and 2MU, first across on 40 meters, QST, March 1925, page 35. Clinton B. DeSoto, 200 meters and down, the American Radio Relay League, Incorporated, 1936, page 100. 6AWT, Hoover Cup winner, 1924, Amateur Radio Stations, QST, May 1925, page 54. With our thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. It is once again time to start preparing for the ARRL Field Day and AMSAT Field Day. Yes, AMSAT has a field day on the satellites, and we do score and present certificates. The dates and times are the same as the ARRL as far as starting, ending, and submitting scores. This year, there are fewer satellites than in years past. FM satellites are usually the first stop if you're trying to earn your ARRL bonus points. However, what you may find by trying and testing before Field Day will not work on Field Day because everyone is trying to make a contact at the same time. I would suggest practicing on the Digipeater satellites. They are almost identical to working an FM satellite, except you transmit and then the satellite repeats it on the downlink. Then the other station does the same thing. This year you can expect to be able to use the ISS and SO50 as your 2 FM satellites. For linear satellites, we have AO7, AO73, FO29, JO97, and RS44. For Digipeater, possibly the ISS and SONAT-2. AO123 is an FM satellite, but barely on, and possible Digipeaters are NACSAT-2, LaserSat, and NO44. There's one resource that will help you the most. That is AMSAT.org. Click on Satellite Resources and look at the satellite status link to see if your chosen satellite is operating. Then you can also use the frequencies link to make sure you have the correct up and down frequencies. Have fun and be sure to submit your score to AMSAT for your satellite contacts. Click on the Events tab and Field Day for the rules and submission sheet. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for a look at this week's terrestrial propagation forecast and a look at the solar weather. Solar activity went from low to high this week. Activity was dominated by region 4455, which produced frequent C-class flares alongside 3 significant flare events, an M9.3 on June 1st, as well as an M7.7 and an X1.0 on June 3rd. There are 8 numbered regions on the visible disk. Region 4455 remains complex, maintaining its anti-hail configuration and displaying a newly developed delta structure. There are 8 numbered regions on the visible disk. Region 4455 remains complex, maintaining its anti-hail configuration and displaying a newly developed delta structure. Continuous flux emergence and spot growth with prenumbral development were observed just ahead of its mature positive polarity lead spot. Region 4458 and 4459 both showed growth and consolidation, with region 4459 showing rapid spot development in its trailing area and gaining a mixed polarity gamma configuration. Region 4461 also showed flux emergence, driving a gamma configuration through extreme foreshortening near the limb limits, high confidence analysis of its overall complexity. Region 4462 consolidated and showed increased separation between its poles. The remaining regions were stable or in decline. Several eruptive events occurred during the reporting period. An M9.3 flare on June 1st was accompanied by wideband radio emissions, including a Type 4 radio sweep with an estimated shock velocity of 253 kilometers per second and a 10.7 centimeter radio burst. An associated coronal mass ejection became visible in LASCO C2 imagery on June 2nd, while faint in coronagraph imagery, GOES and SUVI imagery implies a partial to full halo profile, and Core 2 triangulation confirms an Earth-directed component. Modeling indicates that this event is the most Earth-directed CME of the period's events. The M7.7 flare on June 3rd was accompanied by wideband radio emissions, including a Type 4 sweep, a Type 2 sweep, and an estimated shock velocity of 313 kilometers per second, and a prominent 3-minute 10.7 centimeter radio burst. The associated CME was first seen in LASCO C2 imagery on June 3rd. GOES and SUVI 304 imagery shows much of the ejecta was deflected significantly northward by an adjacent positive polarity coronal hole. Stereo Core 2 imagery and modeling shows that while it retains an Earth-directed glancing component, it is the least directly targeted event of the period. Solar activity is expected to be at moderate to high levels through June 6th. M-class minor to moderate flaring remains likely, with a slight chance for X-class strong or greater events, primarily due to the eruptive capabilities of regions 4455, 58, and 59. Solar wind parameters continue to be slightly elevated, with conditions reflecting possible embedded transient influences. Wind speeds held steady near 400 kilometers per second for most of the period before a distinct increase to near 450 kilometers per second late in the period. The phi angle showed a distinct transition into the positive or away from the sun sector late in the period. Mild enhancements are expected early on June 4th under the initial onset of positive polarity high-speed stream influences. Conditions will escalate dramatically mid to late on June 4th with the arrival of multiple June 3rd CMEs. These significant enhancements are expected to persist through June 5th, with elevated conditions persisting through June 6th. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Wetzel-Swab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOA CAP Online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week on June 4th, VHF UHF FT8 Activity Contest NA, that is digital. On June 4th and 5th, the Walk for the Bacon QRP Contest, CW. June 4th, the NRAU 10-meter activity contest, CW phone and digital. Also on June 4th, the SKCC Sprint Europe, that's CW. And on June 5th, the HA3NS Sprint Memorial Contest, that is CW as well. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information in your area. Upcoming ARRL conventions and major events, June 5th through the 7th at CPAC, hosting the ARRL Northwestern Division Convention. That's in Seaside, Oregon. June 13th, the Knoxville Ham Fest, hosting the ARRL Tennessee State Convention in Knoxville, Tennessee. And on June 14th, the Breeze Shooters Ham Fest, Computer and Electronics Show, hosting the ARRL Western Pennsylvania Section Convention. That's in Butler, Pennsylvania. And to save the date, remember June 26th to the 28th, 2026, it's Ham Radio, International Amateur Radio Exhibition in Friedrichshafen, Germany. And this reminder, you can register now for the 2026 ARRL National Convention hosted by the Huntsville Ham Fest on August 21st to the 23rd. Step 1, register for the National Convention program for Friday, August 21st, and then get your Huntsville Ham Fest tickets for Saturday and Sunday, August 22nd through the 23rd. And there are links at arrl.org to help you with that registration. Search and rescue crews near Las Vegas, Nevada have recently responded to 3 hiker emergencies in less than a week. Rescues on Mount Charleston, Craft Mountain, and Cathedral Rock are raising concerns about hiker preparedness as triple-digit temperatures approach that area, including how hikers communicate the need for fire and medical help. Recently, Joe Pingree, WB2TVB, and his wife Karen, KG6CUK, hiking in Red Rock Canyon, were interviewed by a reporter from KTN TV 13. Pingree said they talked about a lot of issues, including the use of amateur radio. And that interview was aired on the station's 11 o'clock news. There is a link to watch that interview at arrl.org.
United States Space Command has launched a new series of classified war games called Apollo Insight, bringing together military experts and commercial space companies to examine potential threats in orbit. The first tabletop exercise focused on a simulated scenario involving a nuclear payload in low Earth orbit and its potential consequences for space operations. Officials said a nuclear detonation in orbit could destroy and disable thousands of satellites and disrupt communications, navigation, and surveillance systems worldwide. Previous government assessments suggested portions of low Earth orbit could become unusable for up to a year following such an event. Space Command plans additional Apollo Insight exercises later this year focused on orbital maneuver warfare and other evolving space threats.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
SpaceX has flown Starship V3 for the first time in a test flight that met most of its goals. The company had to step down from a launch attempt on the evening of May 21st due to a technical issue. Specifically, a hydraulic pin holding the spacecraft's tower arm in place would not retract. But on May 22nd, nothing prevented SpaceX from launching the upgraded version of its spacecraft designed for journeys to the Moon and Mars. The launch vehicle ignited all 33 of its Super Heavy boosters, new Rapture 3 engines, and then lifted off at 22:30 UTC from Starbase, Texas. During ascent, one of the booster's engines shut down, but Starship continued its flight until it was time for the stages to separate. The booster was able to perform a directional flip maneuver, which the company wanted to test for future missions. However, it was unable to light all the engines needed to perform a successful boost-back burn, the other maneuver necessary for the rocket to be able to travel back toward its landing site. It wasn't a loss, however. SpaceX had been catching Super Heavy boosters with its launch tower's mechanical arms in previous flights, but it never intended to recover this one. Despite the engine failures, SpaceX chief Elon Musk congratulated his team on an epic first Starship V3 launch and landing, telling them they scored a goal for humanity. SpaceX managed to pull a largely successful test flight just in time for its initial public offering. The company just publicly filed its IPO paperwork with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and Reuters has reported that SpaceX shares are expected to start trading on June 12th.
The following story was written by Alan Boyd, VE3AJB, President, Radio Amateurs of Canada. Radio Amateurs of Canada has received the news that RIC Vice President Brent Taylor, VY2HF, became a silent key on May 21 at the age of 66. Brent was first licensed in 1984 as VE1 APG and received his partial HF privileges 6 months later. 1 year later, he passed his advanced exam and obtained the call sign VE1JH, a call he used for more than 20 years. Brent was widely respected for his dedication to amateur radio and his strong belief in supporting amateur radio organizations. He helped grow the amateur radio community in the Charlottetown area as an organizer and instructor for the Charlottetown Amateur Radio Club's Basic Amateur Course. Brent was a member of the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Charlottetown Amateur Radio Club, the International Repeater Group, New Brunswick, the Amateur Radio Relay League, Radio Society of Great Britain, AMSAT, the National Radio Club, and the Canadian International DX Club. Outside of amateur radio, Brent worked for the Federal Department of Veterans Affairs as acting manager and responsible of the database that holds the Veterans Affairs client information. Prior to that, he served 10 years as a member of the Veterans Review and Appeal Board. Earlier in his career, Brent worked as an educator, a radio broadcaster, a newspaper columnist, and served 1 term as a member of the Legislative Assembly of New Brunswick. Over the years, Brent served the amateur radio community in many leadership roles. He was a past president of the Fredericton Amateur Radio Club and the New Brunswick Amateur Radio Association. He was also involved with the Canadian Amateur Radio Federation and the Canadian Radio Relay League prior to their merger. In September of 2020, Brent was appointed as a trustee of the Canadian Amateur Radio Hall of Fame, representing Prince Edward Island for a 3-year term. Brent and I were elected and appointed as president and vice president in November of 2024. As a former vice president myself, I had ideas about the direction I wanted to take the REC, and it was Brent who helped guide me in many decisions. He was my rock within the organization, someone I could always bounce ideas off, and he would honestly tell me whether I was heading in the right direction. We were a team. I knew Brent always had my back, and he knew I had his. We recently returned from Ottawa, where we worked together at the headquarters discussing plans and ideas for the coming year. His death has come as a tremendous shock and represents a deep personal and organizational loss, not only of a trusted colleague, but a close friend. Brent Taylor, VY2HF, will never be forgotten by amateur radio and by everyone who had the privilege of knowing him. 7-3, Alan Boyd, VE3AJB, President, Radio Amateurs of Canada. On a personal note, Brent was an anchor for This Week in Amateur Radio during our early years, when we distributed by satellite. He played an important part in the history of our news service. We're sorry to learn of his passing. 7-3, Brent, from all of us here at This Week in Amateur Radio.
It's that time of year again, summer and field day. Each year, the American Radio Relay League sponsors Field Day as a picnic, a campout, practice for emergencies, an informal contest, and, most of all, fun. The event takes place during a 27-hour period on the 4th weekend of June. For 2026, the event takes place from 1800 UTC on Saturday, June 27th, 2026, through 2100 UTC on Sunday, June 28th, 2026. Those who set up prior to 1800 UTC on June 27th can operate only 24 hours. The Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation promotes its own version of Field Day for operation via the amateur satellites, held concurrently with the ARRL event. This year should be as much fun as last year since we have more than 10 transponders and repeaters available. Users should check the AMSAT status page for what is available. If you are considering only the FM voice satellites, there are ISS, SO50, AO123, SO125, and Sonata 2. It might be easier this year to make that one FM contact for the ARRL bonus points with so many FM birds. The congestion on FM low Earth orbit satellites is always so intense that we must continue to limit their use to 1 QSO per FM satellite. This includes the International Space Station. You will be allowed 1 QSO if the ISS is operating voice. It was suggested during past field days that a control station be allowed to coordinate contacts on the FM satellites. There is nothing in the rules that would prohibit this. This is nothing more than a single station working multiple QSOs. If a station were to act as a control station and give QSOs to every other field day station, the control station would still only be allowed to turn in one QSO per FM satellite, while the other station would be able to submit one QSO. The format for the message exchange on the ISS or other digital packet satellite is an unproto packet to the other station, three-way exchange required, with all the same information as normally exchanged for ARRL field day. If you have worked the satellites on field day in recent years, you may have noticed a lot of good contacts can be made on some of the less populated low Earth orbit satellites like AO7, RS-44, AO-73, and JO-97. During field day, the transponders come alive like 20 meters on a weekend. The good news is that the transponders on these satellites will support multiple simultaneous contacts. The bad news is that you can't use FM, just low duty cycle modes like SSB and CW. The complete rules for AMSAT Field Day may be found online at amsat.org/fieldday.
AMSAT has officially opened the nomination period for its 2026 Board of Directors election, which will take place during the third quarter of the year. 3 director positions are set to expire in 2026. The current board members whose seats are up for election are Mark Hammond, N8MH, Bruce Page, KK5DO, and Paul Stotzer, N8HM. In addition to these 3 full director roles, up to 2 alternate directors may also be elected to serve 1-year terms. To nominate a candidate, a written submission is required. Nominations must include the nominee's name, call sign, and contact information, along with the same details for either 5 AMSAT members in good standing or 1 member society endorsing the candidate. Nominations should be directed to the AMSAT Secretary, Douglas Tabor, N6UA, 1133 Verlin Way, Cheyenne, Wyoming, 82009. Per AMSAT's bylaws, all nominations must follow the format specified by the Secretary. Doug Tabor has indicated that nominations will be accepted in both hard copy via postal mail and digital formats, including email or scanned documents. However, fax submissions are not permitted. Email nominations should be sent to dtabor@amsat.org. All nomination petitions must be received by the Secretary no later than June 15th. After the submission deadline, the Secretary will confirm the eligibility of each candidate and the supporting members or societies, with final notification to candidates provided by the end of June.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT's Satellite Shorts from All Over. And we begin this week with NASA confirming on May 21st that the Russian segment of the International Space Station has begun leaking atmosphere into space again. It's an old problem that NASA recently hoped was resolved. In January, NASA said that after multiple inspections and sealant applications, the pressure inside this segment, known as the PRK module, had reached a stable configuration. The PRK module is essentially a transfer tunnel attached to the Zvezda service module on the Russian segment of the space station. Unfortunately, the leak returned 3 weeks ago after Russian cosmonauts unloaded cargo from the Progress 95 cargo spacecraft. Although there is no impact on astronauts aboard the station, nor any immediate concerns about the station's health, the returning leak issue raises new questions about the long-term viability of the ISS. And our final story is also with NASA, as we learned that NASA has released the images Psyche space probe took when it did a Mars flyby to get a gravity assist from the red planet on its way to the metallic asteroid 16 Psyche. The photos are available at the main mission website. After getting gravity assist from Mars, Psyche will resume using its solar electric propulsion system to continue its journey. The spacecraft started its 6-year trip to its namesake asteroid back in October 2023. During the flyby, it got closer to Mars than the planet's own moons and passed within 2,800 miles of its surface at its closest approach. The spacecraft is expected to reach its destination in 2029, after which it will spend 2 years orbiting and observing the asteroid. 16 Psyche is the largest known metallic asteroid in our solar system, and scientists believe data from observing it could give us insight about the formation of our own planet's core.
The Lewis and Clark Trail on the Air is a special event that commemorates the historic Lewis and Clark Trail. The trail covers 4,900 miles through 16 states and includes the disembarkation from Camp River Du Bois in Illinois, known as the Eastern Legacy. The event is sponsored by the Clark County Amateur Radio Club, with support and participation from clubs in all 16 states along the historic trail. The event begins at 0000 UTC, Saturday, June 6, 2026, and is active through 2359 UTC, June 21st. Operating hours, 24 hours per day for the duration of the event. Operating modes include SSB phone, FM phone, CW, and FT8/FT4. Any combination of modes towards working all 16 states and bonus stations is allowed. A schedule for planned operations for each activating station on the trail will be posted on the website and on Facebook. Certificates will be available for purchase via the certificates page through July 31st, 2026. PDFs will be emailed starting July 7th. Printed certificates will be mailed on August 24th.
Astronauts from China's Shenzhou 21 mission have returned to Earth just days after the three-member Shenzhou 23 crew's arrival at the Tiangong Space Station. The Shenzhou 23 mission features a first for any Chinese astronaut. One of the crew members is scheduled for an extended stay on board, remaining there for a year. In 6 months, the Tiangong Station crew will also welcome an astronaut from Pakistan with the launch of the Shenzhou 24 mission. The Beijing-trained crew member will be the first international astronaut to visit the Chinese space station. Tiangong is considered an important stepping stone in China's goal to land astronauts on the moon by 2030. The U.S. space program is in a race with China's in the hopes of returning astronauts to the lunar surface in 2028. Meanwhile, amateur radio is already there. In 2024, Japan's ham radio station, JS1YMG, became the world's first licensed ham radio station on the lunar surface.
Young operators are getting ready for Youngsters on the Air summer camp in Region 1 of the IARU. Applications in the United Kingdom increased by 200% this year for a place in the Youngsters on the Air summer camp to be held in the Austrian Alps, according to the Radio Society of Great Britain. This year's special session, organized by the IARU Region 1's Youth Committee and the Austrian Amateur Radio Society, SFRO, will be held from the 25th of July through the 1st of August. It is the 14th annual such camp, designed to build radio skills, foster international friendships, and ensure a robust future for the next generation of hams. The RSGB has announced it will be sending 3 campers: Tom, Mike 1, Tango Juliet Mike, the 25-year-old team leader, with team members Philippe, Mike 7, Sierra Zulu Whiskey, and Milo, Mike 9, India Lima Oscar, who are 16 and 17 respectively. Last year, the camp was held in August, just outside Paris.
Many consider de-expeditioners to be the ultimate in radio adventures, and while that may be true in terms of geography, there is another landscape where radio adventurers are active and thriving and welcoming newcomers. The radio adventure that awaits beyond the realm of VHF and UHF can be found at 900 MHz and above on the microwave bands. Later this year, it will find a home off the air for a few days in Rochester, New York, where the Rochester VHF Group is hosting Microwave Update, an international conference that draws 100 or more attendees. Registration began recently for the conference, which will be held on the weekend of October 23rd in a spacious, state-of-the-art facility being made available at the L3 Harris Conference Center in Rochester, New York. Dave Halliday, Kilo 2 Delta Hotel, one of the organizers, said that if you've had your eye on the higher part of the spectrum, now's the time to plan to attend the conference, which is hosted every year in a different city. He went on to say that it's a friendly atmosphere. Everyone there are buddies. Bill Rogers, Kilo 2 Tango Echo Romeo, head of the committee, said there is also a lot of expertise and support among microwave veterans. In fact, in Rochester, many of them are current or former employees of L3 Harris. In addition to talks, there will be a tune-up clinic, and representatives from Keysight Technologies will be on the site with their test equipment. This is Rochester VHF Group's third year hosting the conference, said another organizer, Ron Panetta, Whiskey Bravo 2, Whiskey Gulf Hotel, and guests can take advantage of what the region has to offer. Less technical activities will take place at the nearby Doubletree by Hilton Hotel for a banquet and a flea market, and there will be a side trip on Thursday, October 22nd, to the Antique Wireless Museum. To register, visit microwaveupdate.org. That's microwaveupdate, one word, .org.
China launched the Shenzhou 23 spacecraft on May 24th, with 3 astronauts heading to its space station, including one set to stay in space for an entire year. The spacecraft blasted off from the Jingquan Satellite Launch Center in northwestern China. The much-anticipated launch comes as China prepares for its first crewed lunar landing by 2030. The astronauts on the mission are Zhao Yangzhu, the commander, Sheng Zhanzhuan, and Li Qingyang, also identified by Chinese authorities as Li Jiaying, using the Mandarin translation of her name. Lei, who was born and raised in Hong Kong and has a doctoral degree in computer forensics, is the first astronaut from the city on a space mission. One of the 3 astronauts on the Shenzhou 23 mission is scheduled to stay at the orbiting space station for an entire year in what would be among the world's longest single stays in space. The astronauts' mission is to explore human adaptability and performance limits in long-duration spaceflight environments, state media reported.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Radiant, short for Radio Amateur Delay-Tolerant Interplanetary Networking Testbed, is an open-source project seeking to bring NASA-inspired delay-tolerant networking concepts to amateur radio. The effort aims to create communication systems capable of handling intermittent, disrupted, or long-delay links ranging from terrestrial amateur radio networks to future cislunar communication systems. Project developers describe Radiant as a stepping stone toward Earth-Moon networking experiments using technologies and operating practices accessible to the amateur radio community. The initiative is supported by AMSAT UK, AMSAT DL, and Goonhilly Earth Station, and is actively seeking collaborators. The project is built around NASA Glenn Research Center's high-rate delay-tolerant networking software, known as HDTN, which implements Bundle Protocol version 7. Rather than assuming a continuous network path between endpoints, DTN stores and forwards data bundles whenever communication opportunities become available. This approach allows communication systems to survive outages, long propagation delays, and interruptions that would break conventional internet-style connections. Project developers say these networking methods are essential for future deep space operations where connectivity may be intermittent or unpredictable. Radiant incorporates amateur radio techniques directly into its design. The protocol stack uses Licklider transmission protocol carried over KISS framing and conventional amateur radio hardware operating at 9600 baud G3R UH packet speeds. Call signs are embedded into DTN endpoint identifiers to preserve amateur radio regulatory compliance while allowing efficient network routing. Current demonstrations include store and forward operation, systems designed for persistent storage through power interruptions, priority handling of traffic, and telemetry monitoring through HDTN interfaces. Among the project's early accomplishments is a functioning 3-node cislunar simulation capable of introducing realistic packet propagation delays. Developers report demonstrations simulating Earth-Moon delays of approximately 1.3 seconds and Earth-Mars delays ranging from 3 to 12 minutes. Contact graph routing is used to calculate communication paths through relay nodes, demonstrating multi-hop relay in simulations similar to what future space networking architectures may require. The project deliberately avoids encryption and cryptographic methods to maintain compatibility with amateur radio regulations. Development is planned in phases beginning with terrestrial validation using readily available amateur radio equipment. Phase 1 testing currently uses Raspberry Pi systems, Mobilink D TNC4 hardware, and Yaesu FT817 radios to validate networking functions across ground-based links. Future plans include demonstrations through the QO100 geostationary satellite, a CubeSat engineering model, and eventually an orbital low Earth orbit payload operating on amateur frequencies. Longer-term ambitions include experiments supporting amateur participation in cislunar communications, the region of space between Earth and the Moon. Project organizers emphasize that amateur operators possess unique experience relevant to difficult communication environments, including weak signal work, scheduled links, and operation over challenging propagation paths. Radiant developers are seeking participation from amateur radio clubs, universities, CubeSat teams, microwave experimenters, and packet radio operators interested in contributing to future testing and development. Users registering through the project website can also access additional information and requirements associated with each development phase. Additional information and project details are available on the Radiant website.
A new community challenge called Bird Chaser Bingo Summer 2026 is inviting amateur radio satellite operators to add a playful twist to their on-air activities. Organized by Sean Borgerson, KK7OVF, the event is now underway and invites operators to participate throughout the summer. Operators can participate from anywhere and compete by completing satellite-themed bingo objectives based on contacts, locations, satellites, and operating challenges. Bird Chaser Bingo draws inspiration from other lighthearted amateur radio satellite activities, such as Walmart parking lots on the air and AD0 Squared. Organizers describe it as a friendly competition intended to encourage operating activity and create opportunities for satellite operators to connect while pursuing unusual goals. There are no entry fees, sponsors, or geographic limitations, and participation is open to satellite operators worldwide. Players receive a bingo card filled with summer-themed operating tasks and satellite-related objectives. Participants can earn a traditional bingo by completing a row, column, or diagonal. Those seeking an additional challenge can attempt a full eclipse, the event's term for completing every square on the card. Organizers say that a single contact may count for multiple squares if it satisfies more than one requirement, creating opportunities for memorable one QSO bingo wonder moments when several conditions align at once. Operators submitting completed cards will receive recognition, and printable certificates will be emailed for completed bingo achievements. Participants who complete a full Eclipse card are also expected to receive commemorative QSL cards. Event organizers note that QSL distribution outside the United States may be limited by mailing cost and available resources. Activity for Bird Chaser Bingo runs from May 15th through August 31st, 2026, using UTC dates. Completed card submissions are requested by September 15th, 2026. Participants are encouraged to use online tools such as hams.at to identify portable operators and satellite activations. Organizers suggest rovers include notes such as Bingo Campground or Bingo Festival in activation announcements to help other participants locate qualifying activity. Bird Chaser Bingo organizers say that the event is intended as a relaxing summer operating activity rather than a race. Participants are encouraged to enjoy portable operations, unusual activation locations, and the occasional unexpected contact that checks multiple boxes at once. Organizers also encourage operators to share activation details through online tools and social media to attract even more participants. The event runs on the honor system and jokingly warns that any funny business may result in QRM. Additional information, sign-up details, and Bird Chaser Bingo cards are available at www.borgersons.com. That's www.borgersons.com.
China has just unveiled a game-changing graphene-based battery that fully charges in just 5 minutes, according to a post in Knowledge Network. This isn't just about blazing fast speed, though. The next-gen tech completely reshapes the future of power with some massive upgrades. 4 times longer lifespan. Yes, it lasts 4 times longer than the traditional lithium-ion batteries, drastically cutting down on electronic waste. Zero fire risk. Built with ultimate safety in mind, its advanced chemistry is entirely stable and designed to never catch fire. Superior science. By utilizing graphene, a single layer of carbon atoms, the battery offers unparalleled conductivity and flawless thermal management. From smartphones to electric vehicles, this leap in material science is about to set a brand new global standard for how we power our lives.
On August 12, there will be a solar eclipse visible in the UK. It will be a total eclipse for areas west of the UK, and its maximum will be about 90% totality in the UK. This lends itself to some HF propagation experiments, and the RSGB Propagation Studies Committee is drawing up plans for RSGB members to participate. These include experiments which include monitoring the medium wave stations in the UK, Morocco, and Algeria. An 80-meter CW contest is also being arranged, and other radio amateurs are being encouraged to run WSPR on 80 meters during the eclipse. The RSGB Propagation Studies Committee Chair, Steve Nichols, G0KYA, will outline what we can expect and why, as well as how you can participate. Check the RSGB website for further details as the eclipse date approaches.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
ARRL and the Huntsville Hamfest will host the 2026 ARRL National Convention and Huntsville Hamfest, August 21st through the 23rd in Huntsville, Alabama. With more details on the upcoming convention and Hamfest, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, with this special report.
The convention will kick off Friday, August 21st with a series of day-long ARRL training tracks and a national convention luncheon at the Embassy Suites by Hilton Huntsville. Then join ARRL on Friday night for a very special national convention dinner under a full-size Saturn V rocket at the nearby U.S. Space and Rocket Center. Access to the museum is included along with the dinner and special speakers. Proceeds benefit the ARRL Education and Technology Program, and additional sponsorships are available. Registration is now open for Friday's National Convention program. Registrants can select at a training track then, and that includes the luncheon for $90. The National Convention dinner at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center is $100 and includes dinner, museum, and a $25 tax-deductible donation to the Education and Technology program. The National Convention training tracks are workshops providing an in-depth learning experience in one of 3 track topics. Attendees will select a training track when completing their online National Convention registration. Training track number 1 is Contest University. Track number 2 is Emergency Communications Academy. Training track number 3 is Salty Waltz Portable Antenna Workshop. The rest of the celebration continues at the Huntsville Hamfest on Saturday and Sunday, August 22nd through the 23rd, at the Von Braun Center, South Hall, which is connected by a sky bridge to the Embassy Suites. Known as the world's friendliest Hamfest, this air-conditioned, all-indoor event attracts a large list of commercial exhibitors, notable forum presentations, flea market, and youth activities. For tickets for the Huntsville Hamfest, they are sold separately and available now. For further details, visit the 2026 ARRL National Convention webpage at www.arrl.org/expo and the Huntsville Hamfest website at hamfest.org. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
Here is a detailed look at the available training tracks. Training track number 1, Mini Contest University. This marks the first time Mini Contest University, or CTU, is coming to Huntsville. Registrants will learn from some veteran amateur radio contesters. The Mini CTU will appeal to new and veteran contesters alike who are looking to hone their skills. Presenters cover general contest operations, contesting skills, and many resources and tools to get more out of contesting. The Mini CTU track leader is Tim Duffy, K3LR. Presenters are yet to be announced. This training is sponsored by DX Engineering. Training track number 2, Emergency Communications Academy. Emergency communications presenters will cover topics including future-proofing ARES, the ARRL Amateur Radio Emergency Service, PACE planning, relationship building, digital communications, emerging technologies, and other topics designed to enhance your emergency communications knowledge and preparedness. Participants will learn their skills and roles needed to become more effective volunteers. And finally, training track number 3, Salty Walt's Portable Antenna Workshop. This workshop, led by Walt Hudson, K4OGO, with additional presenters, will feature practical information for portable antenna building, deployment, and operating. For further details, visit the 2026 ARRL National Convention webpage at www.arrl.org/expo and the Huntsville Hamfest website at hamfest.org.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77 @gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
And finally this week, here is a class I wouldn't mind attending. Chisholm High School's Gifted and Talented program welcomed 2 distinguished alumni to their Texas campus, Keith Cullum and Matt Patterson, for an engaging presentation on the world of amateur radio. Keith and Matt shared their personal journeys into ham radio, explaining how they were first introduced to the hobby and how it developed into a lasting passion for amateur radio communication and Morse code. Their presentation gave students insight into both the technical and historical aspects of the field, as well as the opportunities it can create for lifelong learning and connection. A highlight of the visit came when Keith successfully established a live radio contact with a transmitter located across in Florida, offering students a real-time demonstration of amateur radio capabilities in action. Both speakers are graduates of Chisholm High School and reflected on their early experiences in their world history class in 1995. While students there, they participated in a memorable contact with the space shuttle through the Shuttle Amateur Radio Experiment, an experience they credit with helping spark their continued interest in amateur radio. Chisholm GT students were also provided the opportunity to meet with Cullum and Patterson and learn firsthand about the evolution and real-world applications of amateur radio communication.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard all around the world on the amateur bands, and on great repeater systems like the KB3 CNN Gateway FM Association repeater, on 146.730 MHz every Tuesday evening at 7:30 p.m., covering the wide area of western Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. If your repeater system carries This Week in Amateur Radio, let us know via email, and we will mention your station in an upcoming edition. Send your information to w2xbs77@gmail.com.
Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.